topic that I think interested me long before I began to take on formal leadership roles. But once I started to take on formal leadership roles with all the titles and responsibilities that come with those, then being sort of a student of leadership took on a different level of importance for me because I want to be a good leader and I want to be the leader that I can be in the communities I'm in. So we'll talk a little bit about today some formal remarks that I'll make. I'll engage you in some conversation and we'll do a little bit back and forth. And then we're going to culminate today with a photo opportunity. So we'll do a group photo at the end, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. So what makes a good leader? Lots of people have written hundreds, if not thousands, of books about what makes good leaders. Is it a skill set? Is it talent? Are people born to be leaders? Is it a combination of kind of nature and nurture? Are particular kinds of people better leaders than others? There's a vast literature. But I had to think today about a leader that I'll get to have a photo op with after we finish today. And this leader has the paws of a speeding cheetah, the horns of a fierce buffalo, and the face of a dependable St. Bernard, and embodies the highest standards of speed, agility, and stamina in an atmosphere of fairness and good conduct. And while you might laugh, our beloved Gorlock is all about depicting what it is that is good sportsmanship, fierce competition, and leadership in a very specific arena about Webster University. And Gorlock inspires us to take pride in Webster University and particularly in our competitive teams. So as we think about how the students who developed that mascot, because it was a student-developed mascot here at Webster University, what were they trying to say about leadership in the personification of the Gorlock? This gives us a way to start thinking about what is it that we admire in a leader. So I want you to start by thinking about a leader, and it can be female or male, that you admire either from history, doesn't have to be somebody you actually know, or in present day. So think a minute about who comes to mind when you think about great leader, and we're going to get a list, and we're going to start saying, what is it about that person that makes them seem to you an example of great leadership? So I'll give you a few minutes to think, and then we'll start to get a list of leaders and a list of characteristics. Somebody over here.
How about Steve Jobs?
Steve Jobs, okay. And for what characteristic?
I think he has a kind of real love for what he's doing.
Okay. And the vast universe of people. More.
Oprah.
Oprah. And so what about Oprah?
Well, I think she's very selfless, and she's also, I don't know the word, but she's just out there, like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Public.
That's okay, I'll use that.
Yeah, she exposes it, and yeah, while giving.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no not knowing who Oprah is, right? Yeah. You have one?
Yeah, Ellen DeGeneres.
Ellen DeGeneres, okay. I'm not sure I remember how I spelled DeGeneres, so what about Ellen?
love her personality, but I think the biggest thing I like about her is that she stands up for what she believes in. Very
Yeah. Let's get 2 or 3 more. Yes. Okay. And for you, what characteristics?
Sacrifice himself for others.
Sacrifice. This is shaping up to be an interesting list. Thank you.
George Washington.
Okay. Okay, so George? Determined. Okay. All right. One more. Yes.
Duke Ellington.
Okay. That's a great and different direction, yeah, than we have here. Okay, what would you identify about Duke Ellington?
Even though he was really talented and he knew that, but he was easy to work with others and let them put their input in and stuff and music.
Okay, so included input from others? Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. We'll look at the characteristics now. Anything that you think, if we didn't have to think of leaders first, and we just started from the characteristic list, are there characteristics that we maybe didn't think of that if you just thought about characteristics of leaders, you'd want to make sure got on that list? Understanding? Yeah.
Inclusive.
Inclusive? Mm-hmm.
passionate.
Passionate?
Yeah. Respectful.
Respectful? Okay. Yes.
Empowering.
Empowering? Okay. These are all great words to think about. I'm going to add one in a minute. Go ahead.
I think they're creative.
Creative, yeah. And I think a bit of what maybe was in the Duke Ellington story was some humility about his talent. Well, the one I want to focus on today is the word fearless. And I think fearless is a characteristic that is particularly, I think, important to highlight for women leaders. And so what does it mean to be fearless? I like what Eleanor Roosevelt said about this. She said, "You gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face. You must do the thing you think you cannot do." And so that would be her way of expressing what it means to be fearless. Look at the fear and choose to do the thing that you think you're not able to do. To me, being fearless means being strong and resolute about your beliefs and your convictions in spite of opposition that you may face. Now, I don't think it's the same as being foolhardy. And so just being rash and thoughtless and just sort of like, well, I know what I want to do and who cares, is not the same as being fearless in my assessment. That's more like being foolish and not listening to good advice. But I think once you are firm and resolute and know that you know what you want to do and you've really studied it, to not do it is a sign of fear. At the same time, I think if you give in to fear, it can just really paralyze you and have paralyzing consequences. And so you lose confidence, you lose strength, you lose courage, because life's events require a certain fearlessness to survive and thrive. And as we all go through life, we have illnesses of ourselves or people we love, we suffer losses, we have career challenges, we have jobs we wanted that we won't get, we support a cause that doesn't, make it forward, we lose money, we have economic setbacks, we have political setbacks. I mean, that's just life. So if you're fearful about that and try to avoid all that ever happening to you, it doesn't work, for one thing, because life still happens. So you also just lose your ability to think clearly and to weigh different options and to tap this reservoir of guidance that you can have. I mean, that's the power of this community to me, is you've got a reservoir of people here that you can talk to and tap that have this similar interest in what does it mean to lead. And you've got professors and mentors and family and friends and a whole host of people that are built in on a college campus that then the rest of your life you need to figure out how you build that community of people who are your reservoir of strength for you. And if you kind of cower in indecision, even after you've conferred with others and considered the possible courses of action, you really damage your ability to function in life. And I think the other thing that's much more damaging, particularly for women, is the example that fear sets for others. And so if you've had fearless women in your lives, whether it's a sister or a mother or a friend or a professor or a grandmother or a cousin or whoever it is, count yourself fortunate. Because I think that fearless women have always been with us, but they weren't always encouraged to say who they were. Think about in history of literature, when women who were fearless enough to actually write novels couldn't get them published with a woman's name on them and had to write under male pseudonyms. So there were generations of women who had abilities, who had talents, who had the courage to act on those, but because of a whole host of societal things, couldn't act on them in the way that they became examples and role models for others. And we're lucky to be in a time period when we have women who can be those role models and examples for us. We stand on the shoulders of giants, as the expression goes. But now it's up to us. And so while you're busy learning to be a leader, think about the example you are for others at the same time. Whether it's younger siblings or underclassmen or people in the groups that you're part of, it's important always, I think, to face the challenges and the opportunities we have with grace and with wisdom. And yes, it's an anxious and uncertain time, but I think the more women connect with each other and build community, and we tell stories about where we've been and what's happened to us, that encourages people, it supports them, and it helps all of us face our fears. And every one of us probably has a story of fear and challenge. So I think it's important to face those boldly and then share those stories. So as I thought a bit today about what I could share with you of women I've known that obviously faced boldly the kinds of experiences they had, I had to think back to the time when I was a high school teacher. And this would have been in the 1970s and early 1980s. And most of the women that I had as grade school teachers as I was growing up in late 50s, early 60s, were mostly single women. And I think as a kid, I thought, well, women teachers couldn't find husbands, and so, they just didn't get married. You know how you think about things as a kid. I just sort of thought, well, these were like older women that just couldn't find a husband. They devoted their lives to teaching. It was not until I became a high school teacher myself and began to study more about the history of education and interact with this generation of women who were then when they went into teaching, they knew that if they ever got married, they lost their teaching job. Because schools didn't think it was okay for women teachers to be married. For a whole variety of reasons. For one, they kind of thought that once women got married, they couldn't give like their full time and attention to teaching, so they wouldn't be a worthy teacher. The other thing they thought was that once a woman had a husband, well then that husband's supporting you, you don't need a job. And you're using a job of somebody who has a family to support, and we should give that job to somebody else. And even in the generation of women teachers in like the 1940s or 1950s, when it began to be more possible for women teachers to be married and to have children, in lots of school systems, women teachers were paid less than men teachers because it was thought that you needed to pay men more because they had a family to support and a woman teacher did not. So you can understand how we kind of got to the place we did where there was activism and advocacy on the part of equal pay for equal work, and organizations like teachers' unions and activities like that that began to say this is just not right, and created much more opportunity for people like me who could go into teaching and not think that I was having to trade a teaching career for a family. You know, I didn't have to make that choice. I didn't have to make that choice as a professor. I didn't have to make that choice as a president. But certainly if I look back not too many generations before me, and people I knew that were leaving these professions at the time I was coming in, that was their reality. And so I think about the courage and the conviction that had to accompany knowing that if you wanted to teach, that was pretty much your choice, was to be single your whole life. So it gives me an understanding in some ways of the Sisters of Loretto in a very different way, because I was not raised Roman Catholic. So understanding people who would go into an order and kind of pledge their life to be married to the church wasn't part of my upbringing or my understanding. But I see it as a very closely related kind of decision. That it's a choice of a vocation that is a devotion totally to that vocation to the exclusion of other choices that a person might make. And so you look at the Sisters of Loretto, who, and they're very much in my mind because of Sister Jacqueline's recent passing, they were out of the mold as a Roman Catholic order. They were the first American order to be established, and they sort of carved out their own territory in much more creative ways than many orders of nuns did. And so I think they struck the balance in some very interesting ways, and where they're beneficiaries. When I think about the people we can look back at as our role models, in many ways the Sisters of Loretto can be that for us, even if we're not Roman Catholic, even if we're not a Roman Catholic university anymore. We can look at the fact that they figured out a way as a group of women leaders, even in very tight social and religious constraints, to make an impact for the world. And the Webster that we enjoy today is very much formed by the leadership that they showed. And so those sisters, they were influential in the community. They had a cause, which is make higher education available to women west of the Mississippi. They trained young women to serve their communities. And when I meet those grads from the early years, they were all about getting a career. At a time period when most young women, if they went to get a bachelor's degree, were thinking they were going more to a finishing school to find a husband. That was not what Webster was about. Webster was about young women deserve a degree that gets them a career. And so one of these teachers that I met early on in my teaching career in Vandalia, Illinois, was a Webster grad from class of 1933. And that was the decision she had made, was to teach and to make that her career. And Webster had prepared her to do that. So I had a very early understanding of kind of the dynamic influence that this institution had on generations of young women, and that I'm the daughter, or the the granddaughter perhaps, of those women, in the sense that I get to enjoy opportunities that they had to fight for. And so I look at the sisters. They were progressive, they were committed, they were inclusive, they were entrepreneurial. I think many of these characteristics describe them as I know sisters now and as I knew them. And while the demographics of who is a student at Webster has changed a lot over time, I don't think the values and commitments have changed very much. We're people who care, we respond, we innovate, and we lead. And so we think about the time period in history when Webster was facing these enormous challenges with church hierarchy, with finances, with enrollment, and was really on the verge of just going away. And an exceptional leader with exceptional courage and conviction understood the bold steps that were necessary to ensure its future. And that leader was Jacqueline Brennan Wexler, who everybody would have known as Sister Jacqueline at that point. She was faced with the possibility that Webster College would die. And she determined that it was time to transfer ownership of the college from the Catholic Church to a self-perpetuating lay board of trustees, what we have now. And so Webster came to a time when it needed this strong leader. She galvanized those around her. They made tough decisions, and it's really what caused the college to continue to be competitive and relevant. And she had a lot of criticism. People called her a Benedictine. They thought she was a nuisance. She was kind of stepping out of line in lots of ways and challenging authority. And she was asked time and time again, weren't you afraid of what was going to happen as a result of this? And she's quoted saying, I didn't know enough to be afraid. There's fearlessness. She just knew what she needed to do, and she went about doing it. And so on those fearless shoulders, here we are today. What an amazing story. Webster University, the only Tier 1 private nonprofit university with campuses all over the world, internationally, metropolitan, military. We just got the Open Doors report that now reports that we're in the top 10 in the country for long-term study abroad programs. We're the only institution in the Midwest on the top 10 list. So think about the sisters back in 1915. They couldn't have known. Think about Sister Jacqueline. She could not have known what she was putting in motion that would eventually happen. And then the same true for us. You don't know as you interact with somebody in your group, or in an organization, or a delegate's agenda, or whatever the setting might be, you don't know the power and the impact of the leadership that happens and the changes that are important for the near term, but ripple out far beyond the time that we're all going to be here. And that's what I've got to admire about fearlessness, is that fearlessness faces the immediate challenge, but with an eye to this is really about making things better for a long-term future, not just surviving the moment. And so during that same time period, Sister Jacqueline announced a personal decision. She requested to be relieved of her religious vows, and so she left kind of the trappings of the habit and spread her wings in the real world, and just a few weeks ago passed away, and we had a great memorial service here where we celebrated what her life means. And so the people that talked about her, and people came from all over that knew her when she was president and have been touched by her since. They called her a teacher, dynamic, charismatic, loyal, wise, listener, passionate, decisive, articulate, courageous, And I liked this word that somebody used to describe her was, she had chutzpah. I think that's a little bit of that out there idea. She was fearless. And as I thought about her words, I didn't know enough to be afraid. I thought of the phrase that Joan of Arc once used. She said, "I am not afraid. I was born to do this." So I want you to think a little bit about where you're going to find your courage. Where's your strength going to come from to be fearless? And I want you to remember that this program, the people you're interacting with, the people who support you in leadership, all of us want to be for you the role models you need so that you can be role models for other women. I'll give you one more description of Jay, Sister Jacqueline, that was used by somebody who knew her in a more business environment. And he said, "She combines the bottom line fixation of Ali Iacocca, the humanitarian qualities of Mother Teresa, and the fierce competitiveness of Dizzy Dean." A little bit like our Gorlak, don't you think? A real mix of characteristics that came together in a unique person for the benefit of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of other people. We want to go back to the idea of facing your fears and give you a chance to talk with your neighbor. I want you to talk a little bit with each other about what is it that you find fearful about your opportunities to lead. What fears do you need to face? And we want to ask you to share with the whole group, because after all, you don't want to be on TV talking about your fears. But talk with each other a few minutes, and then what I want you to share is, what are your strategies for facing the fear? Share with each other at least one thing that kind of gets in your way of being the leader you want to be. And then share with each other, what do you do to face that fear? And we'll just hear about your strategies, not about your fears. So let's take 5 minutes to do that. Find a partner and talk about those two topics. All right, let's start with some people that have not given us some food for leadership thought today. So if you haven't talked, let's hear from you. Yeah.
Well, the fear we discussed, I'm okay with saying it, is the fear of failure. And just that whatever you're standing up for won't work out. But what we were discussing was that if you don't stand up for that in the first place, you're already failing. So you might as well try.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so just talking to yourself and saying,
right.
Don't already fail before you start.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Yes.
Kind of along with that, like believing in yourself. If you don't believe in yourself, nobody else will really believe you.
So how do you kind of convince yourself to believe in yourself? What do you do?
Tell yourself that what you're doing is for a good cause, that it's the right thing to do.
Sure. I think a whole lot of the way you talk to yourself in your head is about facing fears. And so there are always these little tape recordings kind of going in our heads, things that other people have said to us or about us. And so if you don't populate it a little bit with your own self-talk, you kind of get drowned out by all that other. And so, yeah, I think just pep talks to yourself. Absolutely. Okay, a few other ideas. Yes.
I get a little nervous and a little afraid to talk to people who I assume have higher positions or better titles than I do. I know that sounds weird now because I'm better at it, but I used to be really intimidated and really afraid. I really put myself out on a limb to ask for something. Like, right. Can I come shadow you? Can I do this? And I've kind of realized, especially now over the course of my senior year, that more people are willing to help rather than hurt. And so kind of had a big door that got open. So it's a fear that is going away, but it's...
So you had some experiences that helped you overcome that. Yeah. So I think sometimes if something is a barrier to you and it causes you fearful reaction, then putting yourself in that situation position where you can build success for the next one. Avoiding it would not do
All right, come on in close.
I have a wide angle.
All right, you need to pull that down so that we can
see this.